All right. Hello,
Nice
Tank
one.
fans. Welcome to Totally Tanked, the tankiest podcast in Tankville. I'm Rob.
And I'm John. Hello.
And today, what are we talking about, John?
We're talking about the T-64 and the newest tank in the world, the new Panther, and a little bit more about Ukraine because that war is ongoing. And I should note it is the 18th of June, 2022.
And what episode are we up to?
34.
34 episodes about tanks. Talked to you by us two, who like to drink beer and talk about tanks. So, now, T-64. Who operated this one, John?
Only the Russians. Soviets.
Yeah. We'll make that distinction a few times because it is quite applicable for this tank. So it was first designed. The design started in 1952, I believe, and from there they went through. It took a while to come up with the idea, and eventually went into production in 1963, entering service in 30th of December 1966, so I'm going to say 1967, so it was when it actually arrived at units and was able to be used. And what was so special about the T-64, John?
Well, it had an autoloader, and it had composite armour, and it was the first tank in the world to mount the 125mm smoothbore.
Started out with 115 though.
It did, but it was also the first to mount the 125.
It was. So it was a revolutionary tank for the early 60s. It was pushing the cutting edge technology of tanks at the time. And
now, what I love about this tank is that it was largely a Soviet response to the British Chieftain, which is a tank we've never done an episode on.
But we will, and we'll have a lot of fun.
We will one day. Chieftain, we've said before, is widely considered to be the finest tank in the world to fight in, as long as it breaks down where you need to fight. And what I love is that the Russians looked at the on-paper capability of the multi-fuel engine and said to themselves, we're going to have that, and then managed to replicate all of the faults and failures of Chieftain.
Yes. So
but it did have better armour, because Chieftain was all steel, which was why it was an absolute death trap from the minute it was created.
Whereas the T-64 was the first tank with composite armour. They started out with an aluminium and steel composite that allowed them to basically increase the armour capacity of the tank as opposed to a steel tank. And again, revolutionary type ideas placed upon a tank that was designed in the 50s, built in the 60s, and was was in production from 1963 up until 1987. So it's when the final tanks rolled off the production line in Kharkiv, and from there it's continuing the service till this very day. There are people sitting in these tanks right at this very second thinking, holy shit, I don't want to die. And on different sides. So good luck to them. And it's an old tank, but it's still going. So,
is this the point we talk about the crap tank fallacy, or shall we hold off on that for a while?
Look, it was new because it was such new technology.
Sorry, crap tank is in 2022 use, not in 1960s use.
No, well, in 1960s use, it was still a crap tank. In 1970s, late 70s and 80s, it was a fantastic tank. But
it was a great tank in the 1980s.
Luckily enough, it didn't get used because the only thing it would have been used for is overrunning Europe as the Soviets smashed through for them, the Western Front. But yeah, to my mind, the T-64 at its height was the boogeyman of the Western nations. It was the mystery tank that wasn't seen until 3 years after it was entered into service. So in 1970s, it was finally admitted that the Russians had it. Didn't actually get seen by any Western states until the mid-70s. And even then, they still didn't know what the capabilities were. They just saw this tank. They had misidentified the T-64 as the new T-72 up until the late 70s, and it's only when the T-72 started coming online and replacing a lot of the T-62s that were in the motorised rifle divisions that they realised that, hang on a second, if that's the T-72, what's this other tank that we've been calling the T-72? And that's when they finally figured out it was the mystery tank was actually the T-64, which was the big thing about it, John, was it was deployed with the tank brigades, the elite guards units, and that were used. Its purpose was to smash through Europe as a breakthrough tank and exploit across the across Germany, Poland, and everywhere. Oh, sorry, not Poland, but West Germany and through Western Europe.
Yeah. Now, just to clarify, because it can seem weird if you're not across the minutiae of Soviet Army doctrine and organisation, it might seem odd to say it was a tank deployed with the tank divisions. Where else would they be? But the reality was that certainly the T-72s were, when they were deployed at roughly the same time as the 64s, the 72s went to, for example, the motorised rifle divisions, and they were there to almost as an infantry tank. Although not in the infantry tank concept, which gets a bit complicated in that sense. But so the pure armoured divisions that were only there to operate as armoured units had the T-64s, whereas the ones that were just there to walk around with the infantry and shoot anything heavy that came into view, that was the second tier tanks, which is where the T-72 sort of came into things.
So the doctrine at the time was the infantry divisions with their embedded T-72 units would engage any Western forces, find where the weak spots were, and that's when the T-64 units, as a single armoured advance, would smash through and then break out through any Western forces and then exploit on the other side. And then while the rifle divisions would be holding the line, as it were, and then exploiting as required. But it really was the T-64 was the mystery tank that the West didn't know about. It had all these capabilities, that huge gun, 125 mil smoothbore gun, bigger than anything else the West was deploying at that stage, could smash through all their armour.
Very thick armour and very good armour as well once the composite armour went in, which is a glass plastic composite that was wildly ahead of its time. Although, now that I think about it, the American M60 was supposed to have glass armour and that didn't work out.
But that didn't come in until the 80s.
Yeah.
All right. So it was, again, while the tanks facing off against the T-64 in Western Europe were the Chieftain and the M60 and the Leopard 1. So you had some capabilities there. But they didn't have the big guns. They only had 105s. The Chieftain had 120s by that point. They didn't have composite armour. The Leopard 2s, the Challengers, and the M1 Abrams were just coming out, and so they weren't fully deployed into Europe for another couple of years. But for that period of time, when tensions were high in the Cold Wars, for those who weren't around in those stages and living in the States like John and I were, it was pretty. You realise, looking back, saying, that was pretty tense times.
They came very close to shooting at each other in 1982.
And both of us were in prime targets around DC. So.
This would have been over quickly.
Yes. So.
Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit about the development of the 64, because it's A.A. Morozov really is a figure in tank design that is unequalled anywhere else in the world.
And he's made sure of that.
Well, yeah, he definitely secured his legacy. But he was involved in the original T-34 design, the World War II tank of legend. Initially involved in the drivetrain, which wasn't great, but because he was a great political survivor, he, when everyone else died who had been involved in it, he ended up running the whole program.
And scrubbed their names from history.
Yes, but it should be noted that the T-34-85, which was very much Morozov's work, was a huge improvement over the original T-34. So he did an excellent job then.
The Tank of Annihilation, as per our podcast.
Yes, that episode's about to become our second one to cross the 2,000 mark.
Lovely. 2,000
downloads. Yes. Anyway, Morozov then turned up with the T-54-55 series, which I'm going to group together because that's the kind of
pretty
the same thing.
Pretty much all it is. The only difference is the NBC, as we said.
Yeah. So that pretty much defined the modern main battle tank. Yes, I know, Centurion. But really, it was one of the most produced tanks of all time and incredibly successful. And
produced up until 1979.
Yeah. And that was very much his work. And then in his twilight years, he wanted to bring all the new concepts he saw coming down the road and produce his masterpiece in T-64. And unfortunately, and this happens to every country with their defence procurement, when you try to bring too many new concepts into one vehicle or one package...
You get a Sheridan.
Sorry, my partner's name is Sheridan, so it's just kind of funny the way you said that. But yeah, it was... I mean, you think of, the F-111 debacles or, even bringing the M1 into service had its problems. And what they had with the T-64 was they literally... The reason why there are so many in Ukraine is because they were being produced by the Kharkiv factory. Sorry, Kharkiv factory. That's a silent second K, I'm told, by the Ukrainians. They had to keep the tanks deployed near to where the factories were to get support from the factories for the tanks because they kept breaking down so much. So particularly from what I understand, the suspension was involved a lot of maintenance that Russian tank crews didn't know how to do. And also the engine, which was an opposed piston engine. And I thought when they said it was opposed piston, they just meant that the pistons lay... parallel to each other.
And now
like
we can actually
this.
See our hand movements going. John, this rather than our podcast where we make all the sorts of gestures.
It's a pity everyone's listening to the podcast. Yes, so it wasn't just that the pistons were pointing directly opposite each other instead of a V or a flat formation. It was actually two piston heads in the one cylinder driving towards each other. And then it also had two planetary gears at either side, taking the power off the engine and then putting them back on the drivetrain, which I can imagine, I can see why it would be a good design, but I can also see why it would be a maintenance nightmare, and if anything went slightly wrong, suddenly the thing isn't working. And also, the great fun, what happens when you have a multi-fuel engine?
You have to clean it out every time you want to switch fuels, and nothing works.
And change all the settings, and and I mean with Chieftain, they discovered no one ever actually needed to run it on different fuel. Now you can argue sure, but it never went to war.
Well, they were looking at the idea of, like us playing 2000 AD way back in the 80s. It was a case
Twilight 2000, I think it was.
It was Twilight, whatever it was. It was Twilight
so role-playing games of kids in the 90s. Yeah. I'm sure for a lot of our audience know what we're talking about.
But the point being is that after the fall and everything's gone and you're scrounging for fuel, your multi-fuel engine is king. So, and that's pretty much why they designed it, is for that very reason. So when everything fails... you need to be able to put in some sort of juice to make this thing go.
Yeah, but then you get the reality where the engine needs a full workshop and a full troop of engineers to make it transition between fuels, at which point it's like, well, if you've got that, you've probably got fuel. And the other thing is that a moderately robust diesel engine can already run on a vast variety of engines and doesn't actually need... The petrol capability isn't adding a lot to it, which is the problem they had with Chieftain. It's the problem that they imported from Chieftain into the T-64, is that...
It was advanced.
Yeah.
Nobody else was doing well, besides British.
But as we know, optimization is essential for performance, and something designed to run on lots of things is probably not going to be particularly good with any particular thing.
All right, so we'll give you some stats about the T-64, just in case you were wondering. All right, so between 1963 and 1987, there were about 13,000 made. Numbers are variable. It started out around 39 tonnes with a crew of 3, so that's a big first step in the change of tanks, because most tanks at this stage had 4, 5 or 7 crew folks, and going down to 3. Oh, sorry, the French had used tanks with 3 crew in it and failed miserably, so 3 crew was not a great idea at that stage, but they came up with the introduction of the autoloader. They were able to get rid of the loader, and that decreased the size of the turret and made it a much more smaller tank, so they could fit everything inside this 39-ton tank. It got heavier over time as changes were made to the tank and what its capabilities were. So I think the Ukrainians at the moment are up to about 45 tons on their tank, and which has slowed it significantly.
But it's still...
Still a tank that still moves.
Yeah, but I'm sort of saying also 45 tons, and the original tank being at 38 tons. it just makes life so much easier for so many things. Bridges and tactical bridges, which is where your people come along and try and put up a pontoon or any other sort of bridge laying.
Versus 70 tons.
Yeah, well, if you can damn near half the engineering that you need to carry it across whatever river or gap you're trying to get across, it hugely simplifies its usage. So, I mean, a big part of its achievement is that this thing was coming in originally at 38 tons with the biggest gun in the world, with the best armour in the world, with a very high speed, 60 miles an hour?
60 k's an hour.
60 k's an hour.
Possibly up to 70 on road. So, yeah.
Down a coal mine, yeah.
But, all right. The other big thing was how high was it, John? 2.17 metres. That's as most basketball, a lot of basketball players these days.
It was as high as a basketball player.
Oh, yeah. And that's really low compared to the 3 metres and so forth that you're looking at with most Western tanks.
Yep.
So,
but, I mean, the Russians did build their tanks atrociously cramped.
Yes.
Which gave them, a smaller vehicle, which means, you get more protection from less armour and all of those good things.
And your silhouette's just so much harder to hit.
And
I mean,
also the very sensible thing of, if you want people to be in these very cramped, ideally as small as possible vehicles, pick the short ones.
Yep.
Yeah, so Russian tankers are short.
Short and skinny.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not getting it out. It's like the Lost Boys, isn't it? They get a bit fat, you cut them thinner with a knife.
All right, so we had 700 horsepower engine. It's not the traditional 600 horsepower.
Well, no, it was a whole new design that didn't work.
It's also not the 800 horsepower jet turbine of the T-80s. So yes, we do 60 k's on road. As it gets slower as it gets heavier. It has a 7.62 coax. It doesn't start out with a anti-aircraft gun, but they do apply one later on. And again, revolutionary. It's remote operated, so the commander can operate the anti-aircraft 12.7 millimeter anti-aircraft gun from inside the tank remotely. So again, no other tanks in the 60s had that capability, and they were able to do that. So again, providing protection to the crew and not having to stick their head out to blat things with a 50 cal.
It's one of the things, we've said this before, but it bears repeating. People have this misunderstood idea that in the Soviet Union everything was centrally planned and very stolid and slow because of that. Whereas the reality is, for example, guards units were paid significantly more money than non-guards units. That was part of their elite status, was that they got paid, I think, twice as much.
And they were usually professionals rather than conscripts.
But it was all, the higher pay counted a lot. I mean, in particularly, World War II, everyone was staying until the end of the war. So, also, in their tank designs, they would have competing design bureaus, and we'll definitely get to that with the story of this tank. And they would produce competing tanks, and they would deploy competing tanks. Whereas in the Western militaries, it was like, we have one tank, and this is it. So in some ways, we talk about competitive forces and free markets. In some ways, the Soviets actually were far more competitive in the way they produced their projects.
Yeah, because there was a lot more riding on it for them personally rather than in the West.
Oh, the people working in the design bureaus?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, you got a 125mm gun, 3 crew, autoloader, composite armour, low profile. Big thing with their armour was the L7 105s couldn't get through their composite armour. That was what the West were very, very scared of. Found that they within 500 meters. Outside of 500 meters. Once they go
500 meters is very close to the enemy tank.
Yeah, I know. I was about to say that's. If you're having a tank battle at 500 meters, you're going back to 20 years beforehand in World War II. That's and even then,
the 500 was close.
Yeah, and that's where the T-34s are trying to get into on the Tigers to be able to take them out. The gun, the 125, because it's the low profile and the small turret, you've only got 5 degrees of gun depression. So
classic Soviet weakness.
And
it's also a thing that on the Soviet steppes and pulling through Fulda Gap into Germany, not really a problem. A lot of open plains. But where they ended up doing their fighting in places like the Golan Heights, obviously not the T-64 because it was never exported in the Soviet era. That boxier turrets with greater elevation and depression proved to be an extremely important thing that doesn't get mentioned when people are doing their top trumps comparisons.
No.
But all of these Soviet tanks had, like you said, 5 degrees, very limited depression and elevation, and which, even in places like the Chechen War caused them heartache because they couldn't elevate to engage targets in buildings.
No. Yes, so once you start going through urban environments. One of the distinctive things about the T-64 was the 6 small road wheels. So where previously the Russian tanks had 5 large ones, now they've gone down to 6 very small ones, and they're aluminium based, and they didn't actually cover the side hull of the tank.
Which is an interesting thing because you don't really think of the road wheels as providing protection to the vehicle, but they really do.
Yeah, because basically that's just they are spaced armour in that sense of they are a solid metal thing that any rounds coming in are going to hit first before they hit the actual hull of the tank. But because the gap between the top of the hull and the road wheels was quite significant, probably about 18 inches or so, there was no extra protection there. So any rounds coming in would go high velocity rounds or from another tank type thing. Would go straight through there, and because you had an autoloader, the carousel sitting at the base of the turret, how do they store their rounds, John?
Vertically in the 64.
Vertically in the 64.
Horizontally in the 72s and the T90s.
Yep.
Yes.
And 80s is vertically as well.
Yep.
But
if you go to our Facebook page, it's about 6 weeks back, we did actually have a video demonstrating the differences between the even series and the odd series autoloaders. Because the 64s and 80s are all the all the vertical storage, and the 70s and the 90s are the
horizontal. Flat and upright.
They're flat and upright.
But the thing is, because they're upright, if a round goes through, it's more likely to strike an upright round because it has a higher profile when coming in from the side. So it makes the turret then ammo cook off and the turret blow off.
Look, you do have an issue that I'm not aware of anyone who's really explored it, although I'm sure it's been done in some private studies that are highly classified. Is if your tank gets penetrated, if your crew compartment gets penetrated, probably everyone inside is going to die from the exotic physical effects of whatever has come in. Does the turret pop off? Yes or no? Maybe. Whereas
it does if you have a bunch of rounds stored at the
bottom. My point is that yes, the Russian tanks with their autoloaders, the turret definitely pops off, and you definitely know that tank is dead. I'm less convinced that the survivability for the crew of a tank that out cosmetically looks like it's in better shape is actually that big an issue. But yeah, it's better if your ammunition doesn't blow up. I'll go with that. And so store it in the bustle with blow-off panels,
yes.
And the French have figured out how to do that with an autoloader, so it's not impossible, folks. No. Yeah.
But so we've got the 6 small road wheels. We've got the distinctive turret silhouette with the snorkel gear strapped to the back.
Yes,
of the tank bustle, the turret bustle.
It was fascinating because we do this thing on our Facebook page and on Twitter where we post a silhouette of a tank with a question mark imposed into it and say, what's our next tank going to be? And for such a significant and heavily produced tank, this one actually stumped a lot of our people. And a few people even thought it was the Armata, which I found really interesting. And the thing that actually stumped a lot of folks was the snorkel gear on the back, which... It's not on every T-64 ever produced or photographed, but it's certainly on a lot of them.
It's most, and I think it's quite a distinctive look of having the either they've got one part or 2 parts of snorkel gear strapped to the back of the bustle.
Now, the other thing that I've noticed, and
it's not a bustle; it's just the turret.
Yeah, it's on the back of the turret. It's basically forming the bustle.
Yeah, it is.
And what I've noticed is that there's a lot of very solid-looking waterproofing on all of these snorkels that I see. And I also see that for something that is fundamentally pretty useless, A lot of these T-64s still seem to still be going around with their snorkels attached. And what this suggests to me is that the crews are storing their personal gear in the snorkels. Because you don't, I mean, yeah, certainly we've seen with the T-72s rolling into Ukraine, there's a lot of personal baggage stuffed on the top of those tanks, which if people are throwing Molotov cocktails at you is not going to be great because that stuff's all going to go up. But
that's all replaceable from the people's homes you're going into.
Well, I guess it's still not good. Accelerating the fire on the top of your tank is not great, but
no. That stuff is replaceable. And
but the snorkel is a good place to stow it.
Yeah, because it's contained. It's got a nice non-flammable, I'm assuming, container on the outside.
Yeah, and everyone's very impressed. Oh, look, they've actually met spec. They're on the parade ground with the correct equipment. Look at them.
So, talking about snorkeling and wading, it can snorkel up to 5 meters. So, when they attach this to the exhaust to stick up out of the water and away they go under.
Well, the exhaust and the intake, but yeah,
and the intake. It's
with instructions to the driver: don't stop for anything. Keep the damn revs up.
Yeah. And there have been unfortunate incidences where because the configuration of the tank, when they have stopped and they've started flooding, the poor driver can't get out because his hatch is shut. Can't open it because the turret and or the gun are blocking his hatch from opening. Can't climb into the turret compartment, the fighting compartment, because the upright rounds mean you basically fenced off from climbing in there. And while it's supposed to have a belly hatch for the driver to escape, when you're underwater and sitting on the bottom, it's not an easy thing to do because you're pushing out against the water.
I was going to say, if you're in any vehicle underwater needing to exit, you've got a great number of problems.
So, yeah, it's not a fun thing for the driver in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I do actually remember when I did my life-saving courses as a teenager, there was a specific thing on how to exit a car that's fallen into water. And the notes were, in particular, you need to sit in there and just wait until the water entering the car has all but completely filled the car. So you're sort of breathing from the...
I've seen that in all the James Bond movies. You climb out and you suck the air from the tyres, don't you?
Yeah, well...
and wait until the hitmen leave and
just
stop
push
shooting.
the valve in with your tongue, yeah. Anyway, so the point is, if the driver is in the tank and it has stopped at the bottom of the river, the chances of him escaping are low.
Limited, yeah.
It's not good.
But it does have a fording capability of 1.8 metres, which when you consider...
It's pretty good. Yeah.
Which when you consider the tank is only 2.17 metres high, that's a fairly deep fording capability. That's you're able to get across a lot of 6-foot bits of water there. You wouldn't want to go 7 because then everything's going to go bad. But that's a fairly good fording capability. So,
yeah. The other thing we've talked about this before, and we've been corrected by very knowledgeable people in the comments that
I never read them.
Yeah, the main purpose of the snorkels on Russian tanks wasn't for the tank to set off across an unknown river. It was to create scouted streams parallel to bridges. When they're performing major river crossings. So the idea would be that you put a bridge down and your trucks are rumbling across that to take your supplies, but you've obviously got limited, literally bandwidth, capacity going across the bridge. And then if the tanks can use their snorkels to stream next to that on a scouted path where all they have to do is gun it and keep going, then that's still actually really useful. But so it's not so much just here is a river and there are the enemy. Just swim under the river and be on your way.
No, you don't
do that.
All right. Something else with the autoloader and the ammunition. How many parts does the ammunition come in, John?
2.
Two.
Yeah. Do
you know why? So while they were looking at the 115s and the 122s to put onto the, and it started out with a 115, you can only carry so many rounds because those rounds all came in single shells.
Yep.
So by breaking the round into 2 parts, they could actually carry more rounds and store more rounds within the turret than they could if they were smaller sizes. So it made a big difference of going to the 125 with the autoloader and a two-part ammunition. They could carry up to. They started out with 37, but they went down to 28 when they started introducing the anti-tank guided missiles into the arsenal as well.
Oh yeah, we should mention it could shoot missiles out its gun.
So from the mid-70s, they introduced the Archer, I think it was, or something like that. Yeah, some sort of archery type name. They.
I mean, I would say it's a classic thing that it sounds very impressive. It can shoot missiles out the gun until you actually get down in the weeds of why you'd want to do that. And
well, I did read some good things about what they were trying to do. So the effective range of the 125...
You get longer range on a missile, yeah.
It was only around 1,600 metres, but it was very effective up to that range. Your missiles would go out to about 4Ks, but they weren't looking to use the missiles to take out other tanks beyond 1,600 metres. They were looking to take out the infantry fighting vehicles, the... helicopters and all sorts of other things that were also carrying anti-tank guided missiles beyond that 1,600 metre range, because within that range, well, they could just drive up and shoot a gun at whatever tank is out there and hit that and blow it up, because they had a great big gun to be able to take on tanks. So you don't use the ATGMs for tanks, you use it for other ATGM carrying vehicles.
No, I get that, but my bigger point is simply that you could literally just strap the missile to the side of the tank and use a data link to tell it what it's doing, and it just roars off a rail.
Again, very interesting technology for back then. They just didn't have it.
Yeah, but everyone fell in this trap of trying to launch the tanks down the barrel tube, and partly because your gunner's already got all its targeting set up to go on that, but... what we're seeing, and in particular, we're going to, trust me folks, we're going to get to the new Panther. What they've done with that is have the missiles launching out of a totally different launcher to the barrel.
Side. I mean, it's just like a mech of some sort, where you've got your PPCs in your arms and your LRMs in the shoulders.
Yeah,
there you go.
Exactly. It's just like Robotech. No, well, Robotech, BattleTech. Although BattleTech did license a lot of its designs from Robotech.
But there's some dodgy stuff going on there. Don't even get into that.
Bjorn, if you're listening, we know you want to do a Robotech episode with us, and you've bought a T-shirt, so you're in a much better state to get one. T-shirts are available on redbubble.com, by the way, Rob. Just search for Totally Tanked, one word.
All right, gill skirts.
Yes.
Let's talk about gill skirts,
John. Gill skirts, the frill-neck lizard of the tank world.
There you guys go. Yes. So its initial design was because of the gap between the hull and the road wheels having a very open area. They strapped three small aluminium plates on the outside of the tank, so that would fling out to the sides, and so when they've stopped and angled the tank, the hull of the tank toward when they're firing at the enemy, these bits of aluminium would splay out to the side and protect the gap in the hull between the road wheels and the turret. Now, these things look very silly, I got to say, but and would fall off or get taken off straight away because they didn't do anything. But of course, they were in all the parades, and so that's why you have these three. If you see them in any pictures of the tanks, you'll have three small bits of aluminium stuck to the side of the hull. They got taken off eventually. They said they were just they were there to be side skirt armor for the tanks or any RPGs coming in, and they would detonate those before they actually hit the hull between the road wheels and the hull and the turret. They got rid of those, and they brought in rubber side skirts, which is what you can see on all the modern tanks these days for them to cover up that gap. But it's worthwhile noting because they were a very strange design of having these things they're on a spring-loaded arm that would flick them out and make them look bigger.
Yeah, and they also had the early ones had quite a lot of flaps around the turret as well.
No, the flaps around the turret is the modern thing.
Oh, okay.
And that's just rubber flaps, and just trying to change the silhouette of the turret. So when you're looking at it, you say, okay, where is the turret? Is it rather than having the V-shaped side, V to the side type turret silhouette, if you're looking at it from the same angle, it's basically just got one smooth line, pyramid line from the top of the turret down. So you can't tell, okay, where is the gap between the turret and the hull?
Right.
So it's just hiding that silhouette.
Because, the very early ones, it was a classic Dalek's head of a turret.
Yes. Round.
Which was very Morozov. Very Soviet armour was and I'm sure it fed into when Terry Nation was creating the drawings for the Daleks for all our Doctor Who fans.
I don't think they were out before T-64, buddy. Before the West knew about the T-64.
No, but T-55.
Okay, yeah.
So that it was a distinctive look to Soviet armour of the period, and
yep, the rounded top with the big gun sticking out the top of it.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, what next, Rob?
It did get smoke launchers, so it didn't start out with smoke launchers. It was like a lot of Soviet tanks at the time. It was basically you turn direct some oil onto the engine and to produce smoke and produce a smoke screen around the tank up until about 1979, I want to say. In which case, that's when they actually got some smoke launchers situated on the side of the turret so they could actually go pop smoke and away you go.
I recently discovered that smoke grenades, as opposed to just using oil in the engine, have a unexpected effect. You might just think, oh, look, there's some pretty smoke. But the smoke's created using white phosphorus.
Oh, yeah, no, they burn.
Yeah, and it's not perfect in its burning. So if you were to be in a cloud of smoke grenade, it would be extremely unpleasant.
It's also why you don't just pop smoke. Infantry doesn't pop smoke at their feet and leave it there because it burns. And I've seen the burns that it causes to people. It's not a fun thing.
Yeah.
Yes, you make sure if you're carrying around smoke grenades in your in your gear, they're all taped up just like you would a normal grenade, unless you're actually planning to use the stupid things. There was attention to crew comfort, unlike previous Soviet tanks. It was a big thing for the T-64 that it had driver assist and better vision slits for the commander, assisted controls, so basically power steering and suspension.
Yeah, this was the elite tank. We don't like to think about the Soviets having elites, but turns out they did. Alan Desmond, shout out to you, mate.
2 legs good, 4 legs better.
Alan's been very upset that we haven't been responding to his comments. So here you go, mate.
Comments?
Also, he's very disappointed in your choice of Budweiser for the last beer review for the M3. He feels that Budweiser, owned by foreigners, is not an American beer at all. You should have gone with something like Sam Adams. So take that from Alan.
All right. Next American beer, Alan. I'll go with Sam Adams. I don't mind saying that, Sam Adams, I've got to say. All right. The commander could also fire the gun, which is actually another big... so basically you have the command and control...
Did he have a vision as to what the gunner could see, though?
Yes, because he had better visual aspects.
My point is that it's all very well to have a trigger that can make gun go boom, but if the dude who's pointed the gun, if you don't have a view to what he's actually got in the crosshairs...
Well, that's the thing, is that the fire control system got improved over time.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
So, when the first introduced with the 115, the gun couldn't hit anything. It was a great big gun that couldn't hit anything. So, but when they went to the 125, they did improve the gun control, the gunfire control capabilities, and so it was as accurate as a 1960s tank was, pretty much.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, I think we need to take a little break.
All right, so we had 3 crew in a highly advanced tank. So one of the issues with having only 3 crew in a highly advanced tank for 1960s was...
It did make the 3 Tankers song relevant.
It did. So the 3 Tankers song was the unofficial Tankers hymn from the three man crews of the BT-5s fighting the first real tank battle of Khalkhin-Gol in 1939.
The most important battle you never heard of.
Yep. Oh, no, we've talked about it a bit.
We've talked about it. Our
Yes,
fans
I was
know
about
about
to
it.
say,
But other people. Yeah.
With and that was from the Hago. That was from the Japanese side.
With the Hago tank.
Yeah. So why they went for diesel, not petrol, because all their tanks bloody caught on fire and everything else like that. But you only had a 3-man crew in this in the T-64. So one of the big issues was because it was a highly advanced tank, it required a lot of maintenance and care, and 3 people basically they didn't have enough. If you're only carrying out those activities at the end of the day, when you've been doing a hard day of driving tanks around, plotting the overthrow of the Western nations, then you're a bit tired, you're feeling a bit drained, and you don't really want to put the effort in to make sure the oil's all up to speed and the autoloader's working and everything else, and so your maintenance falls away. And there was a lot of issues with the tank because, again, three-person crews, and because it's so advanced, the people who were working on this tank in the 60s, some of them had come off T-34s.
Yeah.
Right, so they'd be driving a T-34, and now they're driving a T-64, and go, oh, crikey, I'm a 15-year tanker and so forth, but I've got no idea what I'm doing. And
I've got to say, I haven't driven a tank, but I have worked in fast food service, as most people have at some point in their lives. And one of the things that really annoyed me was that after a long, hard day of, say, record-breaking sales for your outlet, you'd turn around and say, oh, and you've got to clean everything. And the answer, you'd be like, why do we have to clean it? Why can't you get some people in who just clean things instead of people have to, upsell, suggestive sell, make the food? And it'd be like, oh, because only the people who work in the joint really do a good job. We just can't get cleaners to do a good job. And I didn't believe it then, and I don't believe it now. And I similarly say, your tank maintenance people don't have to be the people who drive it. And if you set the system up properly, it's not necessary for the tank crew to be doing all aspects of the tank maintenance. But it seems to be no one can figure out how to do it otherwise.
No, there's levels of maintenance. So
I get that.
You've got crew maintenance, and you've got first line maintenance. You've got second line maintenance. You've got third line maintenance. Third line is basically where they strip it all down and put it back together again.
Yeah, the tank goes away for a refit.
And the second is where it's your 1 year service and/or something's broken and you need to go back and get it fixed at the shop. But your first line is your crew, and they're the ones who have to change the spark plugs, tension the torsion bars, whatever else they've got to do.
Anyway, yeah. Transperambulate the pseudo-cosmic antimatter, Rob?
Maybe. Okay, so as Job was saying before, the first units were stationed around Kharkiv.
To be close to the factory.
To be close to the factory. So
always a worry.
Yeah, so we're talking a lot about the initial stages of this tank, where they did have huge issues with it. So because they'd brought in all this advanced technology and ideas and concepts, yes, the crews weren't up to it, and there were huge downtimes for the vehicles. Lots of failures of the engines because they could only run for 90 to 100, 200 hours before they crapped out. And so they had to have the civilian mechanics available to fix the tanks straight away. Even in the 70s, when they were deployed in early 70s, when they were deployed in East Germany, they would have up to 30 tanks down throughout a year. So that's a battalion of tanks not available because of maintenance and other issues. But one of the things with the T-64, because of these issues and learning curve, essentially, of getting into a more advanced tank, is the Soviets were then able to apply those lessons learned and those capabilities into their newer tanks from that period of time in the T-72s and the T-80s.
I mean, the T-72 was an emergency program because of the problems they were having with T-64.
But now they had people who had been trained on more advanced systems and had that capability, so they could actually provide them and train them, whereas they didn't have them. Nobody knew anything about the T-64. It was there was nothing like it at that point in time.
But this also comes to your problems with conscript armies. They're compounded. One, you're not selecting for the best and the brightest and the most capable in a particular field. And I'm not saying army recruitment is always best and the brightest, but for a lot of armies in the world, it's pretty competitive selection. As opposed to conscription, where it's anyone who's too dumb to figure out a way not to get conscripted. And then your other problem is that you invest in 2 years of training and then they disappear back into the civilian world, and your entire investment in training has been wasted, which sort of leads you back towards a model with your tank where the crew aren't actually doing a lot of maintenance, because that's where your specialists with years of experience should need to be coming in. So it's really just a very different model of how you need to be using it. I'm not saying the Soviets, ever actually thought that through properly either, because they definitely had huge problems with this tank. But it's part of the difficulties of a conscript army, is that more complicated equipment that needs more training and more experience to use properly. They just don't have it. They come in and then they go out, and then you're dealing with the next idiot who couldn't get out of conscription.
Now, that's for a country that basically has conscription but has ways of getting out of it. The Russians probably didn't have that.
I would say to you that there's never been a country with conscription that didn't have a way to get out of it.
Basically, there were tiers within Russia that if you were in a certain tier, you did not get conscripted, or you went to a special conscription school.
Yeah, but let's look at the US in Vietnam. George W. Bush went to do his time in the Air National Guard, while less fortunate sons.
While 45 and his bone spurs didn't even turn up.
Yeah.
The mysteriously disappearing bone spurs.
Yeah, the bone spurs that disappear as soon as you're not under threat of conscription. You know what? If any of our audience are Trump fans, just...
He's going to jail.
You're listening to the wrong podcast.
All right.
We're pretty sure you're all smarter than that.
Yeah. All right, so we've done the carousels, the uprights, the unofficial hymn or designations. All right, so we've talked a lot about the initial introduction of the T-64 during the 60s and its deployment in the 60s and 60s, 70s and early 80s, when it was actually a tank of capability, advancement, and it was cutting edge.
The elite tank of the world's biggest tank army.
Yes. Yeah, it was the one that was threatening to overrun the Western nations. Okay, that's what it was there for, and it was, as I said, it was the boogeyman of tanks. The autoloader, 8 rounds a minute, much faster.
I've heard 10, but very fast when it worked.
It was so it was a hydraulic loader, and yes, there are other stories about it would eat the crew people, the gunners, as it was loading.
I've got two thoughts on that. Which the first one is that maybe this is the origin story of the autoloader eating the tankers, which persists to this day, even though modern autoloaders cannot eat the tankers.
And look, it might have happened because it was the first autoloader, but they improved maybe after the fourth death or arm missing or whatever it was, or near miss. But there's nothing I've found that could verify.
But my two things on that. One is that this could be the origin story of it. The second is this story persists despite the fact that more modern autoloaders, it can't happen, which makes me think maybe it never actually happened. Maybe it was always something that the Loaders Union put around.
I think my thoughts is it happened with this tank, and then they said, we need to improve
put a guard on it. Yeah.
We have to improve it, and guess what? They improved it, and suddenly it didn't stop happening. Is the big issue.
But it's definitely worth noting that when the autoloader broke down, it was down to 1 round a minute, maybe, because it was unbelievably difficult for the gunner to also shove these enormous 125mm rounds into the gun.
Well, it's 2 parts to remember, so it's not all of it, but you having to get it out of the carousel would be the hard part. Yeah. Because it's locked into the carousel.
Well, and it's loaded in for the machine to load it, not for humans to stick their fingers in there.
Yeah, so it's basically strapped into the carousel so that they'd have to unstrap it and then lift it up. And then, or whatever.
And it gets worse, because if the carousel's broken down, then you grab the ones that are handy for the first 3 or 4 shots. But after that, you're starting to have to crawl under other bits of the tank to get them out. So if the autoloader breaks down, you've got a lot of problems, is I think a fair assessment.
Now, I've watched a video this week of some folks in Ukraine at the moment. They were loading the rounds into the tank. So basically lifting up the two pieces onto the tank and then handing them down to the gunner. So and as he was strapping, and then he was putting them into the autoloader, and then the autoloader was putting them back down in the carousel. Now that process was not quick. So your resupply type activities with the tank are a slow. That's a good half hour. Minute per tank. It's a minute per round. So carrying 28 rounds, it's about a minute per round of a case of handing in the two pieces, putting it into the autoloader, strapping it in, and then having the autoloader put it back down in the carousel. So it's not.
It's a bit like a Tommy gun, literally with the circular, or even the Lewis gun, I guess, with the circular magazine. Those things took a long time to painstakingly.
Multiple magazines.
Yeah. They took a long time to put the rounds into, but once they were in there, then you could really blat them out quickly.
But so it was interesting watching the process of having them loaded in. It was not a quick situation like your the S-tank of just shoving them in the back and away you go.
Yeah, or what the Koreans are doing with artillery SPGs now, where it's just a pallet gets shoved in. That's where you want to end up. Just like a magazine on a rifle.
Yes, but eventually these things all got sorted out and became a reliable combat vehicle, which is why it's still in use. Now, over time, it has gone through. I'm not even going to bother going into the dates, types, and the changes of the various designations as the upgrades. So you started out with the T-64, and that had the 115, and then you had the T-64R, which had the 125, and then there's an A, a T, an AK, a B, a BV, a BM2, a U, a B1, a B1M, a BK, and then you've got some bridge layers, infantry fighting vehicles, and even an APC, all based around the chassis of the T-64.
I don't want to be in that APC. Actually, in 2022, I don't want to be in a T-64 full stop.
No. Challenger 2, thanks. Yeah.
I mean, I would be happy to take a ride around the track at a tank festival.
Yes. Wait, should we mention that, John?
Sure, Rob. Let's go with it.
All right. So, Cairns, Australia, August 26th to the 28th. Tank Fest.
Isn't it the Festival of Australian Armour or something like that?
Tank Fest.
There's an armour festival at the Australian Museum of Armour in Cairns, in Queensland, Australia. On what were the dates again, Rob?
26th to 28th of August.
Yes, and we're going.
We're going to go.
Yes.
We will be there.
They haven't replied to my email. That's fine. We'll just do our own thing.
It's $85 for 3 days. I'm prepared to fork that out.
It's the airfares and the accommodation.
It is 2,000 kilometres away from us, all right? For those of you who wonders, yes. But it will be, it's the middle of winter. Well, it'll still be the end of winter here in Canberra, and it'll be lovely and warm and not quite into the cyclone season in Cairns.
And it's the gateway to the Barrier Reef and all.
I don't think we'll have time for the Barrier Reef. We'll be busy looking at tanks, buddy.
We'll see how it all goes. But so the point is, if you too book a ticket to the Armour Fest, then we will all go to the pub together and drink many, many, many beers. And
even if you don't come, we'll do that anyway.
Yeah, we'll do that. But you could come and watch tanks drive around in a circle and come and drink lots of beers. So we're just saying, if you're a Totally Tanked listener or now viewer, we got 4 of them still with us, Rob.
They're persistent, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, and then there's the ongoing audience. But we will see you there in Cairns, and we will drink many beers and watch many, many tanks, and it's going to be awesome fun. We would say our plan is to stay in central Cairns and get Ubers to the festival. So that's where the pubs are going to be, in the middle of town. So just for booking your own accommodation. Yes.
Cairns is a very tropical town.
Apparently the chieftain's coming. We may or may not have a beer with the chieftain, but
It's an Irishman. I reckon we'll find a time to have a beer with him.
I think that it's possible. Yeah, you too can have a beer with the chieftain. Much better than a beer with us. But, anyway, make sure you buy your Totally Tanked t-shirt. That
way we'll know who you are.
To wear with pride at.
Might have to get a second one because it'll be a bit sweaty after day 3.
Yeah, we'll need more shirts. But tell you what, if you come up to us in the pub at Armour Fest in your Totally Tanked merchandise of any sort, we'll buy you a beer. One beer.
One beer.
All right.
But that's our ad that we anyway. The other
T-64 in combat.
Well, it's before we get into that, I was going to say it's a very expensive tank. So
that was the problem. That was why they went with the emergency alternative.
Yes, so it was much more expensive to build because it was a guards tank. It was all the things that went with it. It was a very expensive tank to make because it was cutting edge technology, which is why when push came to shove, they went for the emergency T-72 builds and said, we're going to build more of these, and you can have your elite guards tanks and.
They did take a lot of the technology that worked from the T-64 and put it in the T-72, which Morozov must have hated.
Yes.
I mean, he tried on numerous occasions to kill the T-72 program. And I don't know. I mean, you look at how the T-72's gone in combat, you can say maybe he was onto something. But the
T-72 was cheaper, more robust, and less advanced, and so the crews that are available could handle it better and maintain it better, as opposed to the T-64s, which realistically you want a professional army dealing with rather than conscripts.
Yeah. I mean, the maintenance needs it just needed people who knew what they were doing, and We talked about this with the S-Tank, and lots of Swedes got in touch with us saying, no, it really was the tank we put conscripts into. I would not, by choice, put conscripts into any tank, ever, if I had an alternative, because it is a specialised vehicle that needs specialised skills that need to be built up over many, many years. It
depends on the culture. I mean, look at the Macarva. Again, culture.
Also, not used against enemy armour very often either.
Not nowadays.
Yeah.
Okay, other things about the T-64. It didn't deploy to Afghanistan, even though the Russians invaded in 79-80.
Yes. It was really closely held for the serious stuff. A bit the way the American M60 didn't go to Vietnam. And,
yes.
Yeah.
Keep it on the lines where you think you're actually going to need it. But they did test it out in Afghanistan and found it didn't work well at altitude. So
the engine never worked well anywhere.
By that stage, they figured out the engine, but it didn't work well in Afghanistan, so they didn't deploy there. They stuck with the T-55s.
Yeah, I would say, with Afghanistan, you should see the length of the runways they needed just to get modern jet aircraft off the ground. It's a hot environment, is terrible for combustion engines anywhere. Rob's gone for another VB a little while before we do the beer review. Then
I can. That's all doable.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
The speed of beer is the speed of the plot requirements.
Yeah.
Now.
Yes.
Tanks of the 13,000 built.
13,000?
13,000.
Jesus, that is a lot of any tank.
Yep. Supposedly of the 13,000 built at the. Fall separation of the Soviet Empire in 91. Ukraine took 2,300. The Russians took 4,000.
Yep.
The Russians then gave some recently to Transnistria.
Yeah,
which is the breakaway.
It sounds like it should be in an Avengers movie, but it's real country.
And, no, it's a real...
It's a real not country.
Yeah, it's a real not country. And it's probably where Tom Hanks was from that airport movie. But again, they are becoming the bad guy. They're becoming the bad guys in movies these days because the Transnistrian mafia is where you say, well, nobody's ever heard of this place, but it's a real place, and they have they need a bad guy that's not Russian.
Also, just if you're going to be a mafia, if you're coming from a place that doesn't actually have much government, you can get away with more.
Yeah. So. They've been given a few by the Russians in order to hold off the Moldovan government forces.
Yeah, the Moldovans versus the Transnistrians. It should be noted, and I found it really interesting, that one of the very few combat opportunities the T-64 had before the recent Ukraine war, a Transnistrian T-64 was taken out by a 100mm anti-tank gun.
Recoilless rifle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously got it in that vulnerable side. I would hope, but
or whether or not they actually, if it had been provided by the Russians, it may not have had the ERA provided, so it may have only had the composite armor.
Sure, but it's an AT gun, not a anti-tank missile. So anyway, it's interesting that a 100mm towed anti-tank gun was able to take
500
one
meters, it would still probably do it. That's the thing is that if you
just goes to show that tanks aren't invulnerable.
No, they're vulnerable to close range fire.
But they have always been vulnerable. They were vulnerable in 1916. They are vulnerable today. It is not news to discover that tanks are not invulnerable.
The Russians also gave some to the Donetsk and Luhansk republics, which are the breakaway republics of Ukraine. As we're
that's a real sign that they don't think too much of these tanks today.
Well, they were giving them away in 2014, though. So those breakaway areas, or as the Ukrainians would call it, the anti-terrorist activities, operations, anti-terrorist operations is what they're terming it as.
Speaking of Ukraine,
yes,
because we're just here now. I just want to note the Azov battalion just surrendered that steelworks. I don't think we've discussed it yet.
No, that's between the last time, this time, yes. Yeah. No, they have. Yes.
And all the talk of, they reached a deal. It was not a deal. They surrendered to the Russians. And, I mean, there's some chilling stuff coming out that Kadyrov's being handed a few to personally torture, which is Kadyrov's the Chechen leader who's one of the worst human beings alive. In fact, Kadyrov is apparently the only man that Vladimir Putin personally fears. Which is quite a reputation to have. Anyway, I don't like the Azov battalion. I was hoping that the Azovs and the Russians could just murder each other forever. But unfortunately, they turned out they weren't ideological supermen who would fight on in any conditions, and they just surrendered.
They went for a long time.
They did.
You can't. There's.
I'm not giving too much sympathy to Nazis, though.
Yeah. You would have liked them to do a bit more, though.
Yeah. In terms of, I don't particularly.
Let's face it.
It's a tough war. I don't actually want the Russian conscripts to die for Putin either. I want everyone to just stop fighting and go home.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
But that doesn't apparently seem to be on the table. We will talk more about Ukraine later. Back to the T-64. Sorry, Rob.
Yes, that's all right. Uzbek got some after 91. Belarus also got some. They've scrapped theirs, supposedly. Again, they might be pulling them out of mothballs at the moment, thinking who's going to be invading us.
We can sell some of these.
Or who's going to be invading us next. Yeah. Now, Ukraine, of the 2,300 they got, they sold, for the first time ever, they sold some to the Democratic Republic of Congo back in 2014.
Dr. Congo.
Yeah, it's the first time they've been sold outside the country. Now,
say Angola.
Saying that, somehow at least 5 T-64s have turned up in the Angolan Civil War at the end of the Angolan Civil War in the early 2000s.
In the anti-communist side.
On the anti-communist side. So the communists having been involved in Angola since the departure of the Portuguese in 1975, with Cubans, Russians, and also the other people.
That's some good knowledge, Rob.
What?
I'm complimenting you. That level of detail on the Angolan Civil War.
No, this was a situation that intrigued me because nobody knows who supplied these T-64s.
We all suspect the Uzbeks, but
I found one mention of it. There was nobody else was.
There's no official anyone understand. I mean, which is weird because you think the serial numbers are stamped on the damn things.
The fact that again, it was. I had to look. I spent more than 5 minutes on Google looking for this because it intrigued me.
More than 5 minutes on Google. I mean, that is some research.
That's how I do my research. Right, looking for this specific thing of the Angolan Civil War. When were the Cubans there? How many Russians went there? There were 11,000 Russians, 100,000 Cubans between 1975 and 1991. And then suddenly these T-64s turn up and say, when were the T-64s? There's no time frame given on when the T-64s were there, but it's suspected they were sold in 2000.
And moving tanks internationally is no small endeavour. They have to be... T-64 is a wide tank. It probably wouldn't fit in a standard shipping container. So
it's only 3 meters wide. Probably would.
Anyway, I have my doubts as to whether you can fit it in the standard shipping container because most tanks don't fit in shipping containers. And there are very few planes that could actually, who has the planes that can carry T-64s?
Ukraine.
Yeah.
That's how they got them not Angola.
The other place.
Congo. So they were selling them some planes.
Yeah.
And they also delivered some tanks at the same time. But yeah, so it was looking up about these T-64s turning up in the Angolan Civil War in the early 2000s, going, well, how, why, who? And there was having tanks that have never appeared anywhere outside of former Eastern Bloc countries.
Former Soviet.
Yeah.
These tanks weren't exported to the Czechs or the Poles or the East Germans.
They were stationed there, though.
They
weren't given to.
They were, but they weren't theirs.
No.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was just one of those things of going, how did this happen? And it really caught my attention. But they weren't sold overseas. Is one of the big things during the Soviet era. They weren't sold overseas because one, the Soviets didn't want to give away the advanced technology that was appearing within these tanks, and the other big one was financially. You got less of a return on investment by selling them a very expensive tank that you couldn't sell for as much as you could sell a T-72 or even a T-55, which was a cheap tank to make, but you could have a nice big markup on it and get a lot more profit from it.
Yeah, but I mean, as we've discussed, the Russians couldn't even maintain these tanks themselves. The idea of teaching Angolans, and I don't mean that as a disrespect of people from Angola, more just that they've got very limited
heavy machinery capabilities built within the infrastructure within the country.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, it's mad. I mean, it's why these African countries are still using T-34s and T-55s because they're simpler machines to operate.
And less are more robust in their maintenance requirements. But yeah, it was one of those things of it turned up here, but they didn't sell T-64s on the open market when they could have, but it was just because there was not as big a profit margin in them for selling them overseas. So yeah, as I said, there is one mention of Uzbekistan having sold these tanks to UNITA, which was the anti-communist faction of the 4 or 5 factions fighting for supremacy within the Angolan Civil War.
Look, Smedley Butler's War as a Racket really comes to mind with Angola in that, just leave these people alone and they'll sort something out. But everyone's foreign intervention just made everything infinitely worse.
Pretty much. All right, so Ukraine have kept their T-64s, John.
Yep. And they've done a lot of upgrades, and it's a 64 BM Bulat is the
Bulat is the latest version, is the upgraded version. They've got at least 100 of those, and they've been upgrading more since 2017. Surprisingly enough, John, since 2014 they've had a tank upgrade process ongoing within Ukraine.
What some might call a crash rearmament program?
Might call that, yes, after certain things happened in the anti-terrorist operations began, as it were.
Yeah, it's a really tough one in that it seems obvious, we've got all these tank hulls sitting around, let's give them modernisation programs, and we'll have modern tanks. They had been
carrying out modernisation programs before then.
Yeah.
Now, one of the big reasons that the Ukrainians have stayed with the T-64 as opposed to the T-72 or the T-80s or the T-90s is one, financial reasons. From the dispersal of the Soviet Empire, they got all of those tanks. They kept some T-80s, not as many. They sold all the T-72s, but they kept most of their T-64s because the factory that built them and maintained them was in Kharkiv. So that's why that was one of the big things. They can get good money for the T-72s. They wanted to build more and upgrade more T-80s. Unfortunately, they didn't have the cash to do that, so it was just became easier to upgrade the T-64s they had than to continue to build newer T-80s. So they could maintain a capability and upgrade that capability rather than building new tanks that they couldn't afford. So it was all financial decisions as over time.
It's an interesting one because the T-80 famously has a gas turbine engine, and in the Chechen War they kept running out of fuel because they didn't have an auxiliary power unit, so they had to just keep running the main turbine, which turns out to not be a good idea. Yeah, in fairness to them, it took everyone in the world a while to figure out that was the best approach to take. But the Ukrainians made every gas turbine that the Russians have ever had. It's a huge problem for the Russians at the moment in that their helicopter exports don't work because they keep having to say, and you have to buy the engine and the spare parts from Ukraine, and foreign purchasers are like, we'll just buy from someone who can sell us the whole package, thank you. And particularly
as long as it's not the Tiger.
Yeah, the Eurocopter is a disaster for different reasons. Or just don't ever buy anything from Eurocopter, is the advice I would offer. The Russians have had a big problem in that Ukraine made all of the gas turbine engines that the whole of the Russians used, and since 2014 they haven't had access to those. Ditto the shipyards that can maintain their aircraft carriers. Anyway.
But one of the big limitations for the Ukrainians with the T-64 has been their ability to produce ammunition. So they've basically restricted to ammunition they were building for the T-64 during the Soviet era, which hasn't been able to be progressed into more modern ammunition for the tank gun. So they have tried to redesign what the Russians are doing for their 125mm guns, but have not been able to build the similar capabilities. And so they're stuck with Soviet era APFSDS whatever rounds that struggle against modern armor. Now, luckily enough, at the moment they're only facing T-72s, so it's quite capable.
And old T-72s,
and they're quite capable of dealing with those. But it is a consideration for them that their ammunition they have available to their T-64 fleet is old ammo, and they haven't been able to build something newer since. But yes, they've tried. Although it's a limitation, and I guess they have not overcome it yet.
We're going to talk about the crap tank fallacy more when we get into more recent events, but this is kind of part of the problem is like, why are you totally capitalizing on such a very old tank? The answer is because we're in an emergency and it's what we have. But it's not ideal.
Well, it's financial reasons that they haven't had the money to be able to expand, do otherwise.
But Cicero said over 2,000 years ago that the sinews of war are rivers of gold, and that was true then, and it's true now. The money,
rich as Croesus.
Yeah, the money matters.
All right, done that one. All right. One other fun one for the various versions of the T-64. The command version has a 5 to 10 meter antenna that's strapped to the top, but it can only be deployed when it's has some guy wires down and strapped down, hammered into the ground. So your command tank that's supposed to be on the move and providing command and control of a.
This sounds like a design flaw.
It certainly is, because as soon as you deploy this antenna that gets your communications from higher and lower and everywhere else, you can't move. You're stuck there in that one spot. Yeah. And
so why use that for a tank? Why not just have some high mobility vehicle doing that?
Well, that's a really good question. They didn't think of it. They thought, well, this is a capability we need to maintain and keep going. So that was one of those things that just happened. Also, I would hope you have a second thing that looks like a T-64 nearby, parked down, also with an antenna up, just not to make things easy for anyone who comes there. Oh, what tank do we want to destroy? There's a reason why carrying a radio is a dangerous activity on any battlefield. Now, John, During the Second World War, what was one of your favourite aspects of the combined arms aspect of the T-34-85 on the Advance? What could it carry with it?
People riding on it?
People riding on it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what the T-64 can't do?
Tank riders.
Can't carry tank riders.
Why not?
No, because the exhaust fumes make them all pass out, die, or fall off.
That weird engine again,
Yeah,
hey?
it's the weird engine. The exhaust fumes from the T-64 will...
Also, the Valentine was very good for tank riders.
Yes,
because it had a very flat hull.
Yes, very nice, big flat hull. But yes, the T-64 was not good. You'd think at that point in time, with the BMPs and everything else coming out, that you wouldn't have tank riders going on. But it was a staple, ideal of Russian tank doctrine, I've got to say, is that your infantry was riding on the board your tank, and so you always had them available. And you know what? Weren't stuck with the situation of our tanks have advanced so far and they've destroyed all the tanks in front of them. Now they just have to deal with the infantry. But nowadays, the infantry carries what?
Anti-tank weapons.
Anti-tank weapons, which they didn't back then.
Yeah.
Nowadays,
the boys' rifle existed at the start of World War II, and the Panzerfaust was there at the end. But
there weren't many of them. And But nowadays, with the anti-tank guided missiles, personal carried things are much more effective, and so your tank riders aren't a thing, but it was tried, and found to be not working for the Russians. All right,
and things must have been really grim on that tank for the Russians to give up on it.
So from there, we're going to take a short break and come back with.
Oh, is it time for the beer review?
Beer review.
All right. Welcome back, everyone, and it's time for the
beer review.
Now, I was really excited. What was Rob going to come up with for this beer review? Because, we had the Ukrainian Imperial Stout last time we did a Ukrainian tank, and I thought, and he can't even go with the Czechs or the Poles on this because they never got this tank.
No.
So, are we going to get some Uzbek beer? Are we going to get some Ukrainian beer, some Russian beer? What do you got, Rob? What do you got?
I have Hobo Brewing Pale Ale. It is an expeditionary ale. Maybe an expeditionary ale for the Russians invading Ukraine. I don't know. But it's mainly that I knew I wasn't going to have time to go shopping for specialty beer this week. It was available. It was there. And I hadn't tried it yet. So that's what we've got, John.
Okay, so Hobo Brewing, a South Australian brewery, who have sold this beer into Aldi, which is where the cheapest things in this country are available.
Hey, some of the best as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm a dedicated Aldi shopper.
Same.
I don't like wasting money.
No.
The worst thing with this economic crisis is all these noobs come into Aldi who don't know how to go round in the right way or use the belts. Ugh, hate them.
I do go in the opposite direction of the aisles, just because I started the alcohol and make my way out, because I have a system, John.
Yeah.
And my system works.
I load the dog food first.
Well, I don't know which one you go to, but
not you're in Jamison. You're swanky. I just go to Majura Park.
See, mine because it sits right next door to Coles. It's a case of I can go around to Aldi, get everything I want there, and then anything I can't get, I can go into Coles and pay more for.
Oh, you see, I'm very strict that if Aldi don't sell it, we're not getting it.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I don't have.
You need to bring your partner under control.
No, it's me. I have standards, buddy. I have standards. I'm not compromising those standards of what I get. So we are pouring badly and with a great deal of pale head on it. There we go.
Yeah, looking good.
This is the Hobo Brewing Pale Ale. It's a 375 4.2 can. As I said, the expedition ale. Now, some people might see as an expedition as going out and wandering into the woods and having some jolly old time for a day.
I would have thought bike packing.
Yeah, John's all about his bike packing.
Yeah, I love bike packing.
Expeditions could also be expeditionary forces being deployed in places they're not welcome.
It could be that, but hopefully it's not. It's certainly, it is a hazy bugger.
Yeah, very pale.
So it's a pale ale.
Yes.
Got a very fruity nose, I'll give it that.
Adventurous notes of citrus at the first sip soon turn to a balanced malt and nut flavour that finishes with
I'm not getting any nuts.
that
And I'm happy that way. I don't want nuts.
that finishes with an agreeably subtle orange aftertaste. Brewed in Adelaide, South Australia. No additives or no preservatives.
Yeah, no, Adelaide is, of course, famous for having the worst water in the world.
Which is why you need to brew it in beer.
Yeah, yeah. In the days of the British Empire, there were two ports that the Royal Navy would not take on water at. One was Aden, and the other one was...
I thought it was Calcutta.
No, Calcutta they'd take on water in preference to Adelaide. Yeah, Adelaide does have a very proud tradition of fine beer making. The Coopers are one of Australia's long-term best beer makers. I don't know who's making this, but it's...
Zesty, refreshing pale ale with nutty malt character.
So, Hobo Brewing Pale Ale. Rob, how much did you pay for this?
As much as I paid for a 6 bottles of Chardonnay, which was probably about $14.
6 bottles of Chardonnay for $14?
Yes.
That was some very cheap Chardonnay.
That's Aldi for you.
All right. I would have preferred you had brought the Chardonnay. Look, it's not bad. It's not bad.
No, it's not.
I would say it's got a lot of what I would call lawn clippings in it, which to me indicates you haven't actually got your hopping down completely right, that things have gone wrong with your timings for your hops. But some people are just like, that's the taste of craft beer. So it's... It tastes like a craft beer made by a 21-year-old brewer being paid $1 an hour.
Our symbol
more.
here of a circle with an arrow through it.
It's very male, isn't it?
It is, but...
Looks like Dick and Balls, doesn't it? Just show them again.
That's... I'm not sure what that's supposed to symbolise, but...
Big balls, small dick. That's what I'm getting out of that.
It does have a little hobo with I'm assuming, a hops... on his hobo staff walking away. So that's what I'm thinking there. AMR Cass, there you go.
Nice one. And given that it's an Aldi, it's probably some enormous macro brewer who's just knocking this out really cheap.
But yes, as I said, I hadn't had this one before. I didn't have time to go looking for something else, and so this is what we got. And, well, we have a 6-pack of beer to drink, John.
Whatever will we do? How will we overcome this obstacle?
Life sometimes is hard.
Okay, so we're done with the T-64?
No, we're done with the beer.
Okay.
We're done with talking about the beer, but the T-64
got
has...
more. Okay, go on.
Well, we've got to talk about how Ukrainians... they've kept on updating. They've applied reactive armour, active defence systems, and improved thermals and optics. And that's a big thing. That's for the Bulat, and that's brought it up to speed with...
I would say, Tasman keeps sending us links to various armour actions in Ukraine, and the T-64 has been acquitting itself very well. I think there was one action where there were about 20 64s and 20 T-72s, and the Russians lost 8 and the Ukrainians lost 2, which is good sort of numbers.
And good positioning, realistically. What you're looking at there is probably more of a defensive action than...
Yeah, I mean...
From ambush rather than
if they
tanks, flanks of flights of tanks screaming across the plains, shooting at each other.
It probably wasn't Kursk, but if they keep wandering under your guns, you keep knocking them over. Yeah. But it's still good numbers, so it is holding its own. It is being useful, at least against the very old armour that the Russians have in numbers.
Yeah, and look, some of the numbers we see saying of the Russian tanks taken out, captured, or whatever else, you go, well, that's basically doubling the size of the Ukrainian tank force of what they're capturing or whatever it is they're running out there. But with the conflict in Ukraine, one of the aspects that the T-64 is fulfilling is the Ukrainians have found they've run out of ammunition for their artillery. And so in order to provide indirect fire support to their infantry activities, they're deploying their tanks as indirect fire support. And so they can fire out to about 5Ks with the tanks because they've got more ammunition available for the tanks than the 125mm guns versus the 122mm artillery pieces that they're deploying. So it's just one of those things of, well, we need something, we're going to do it, and away they go.
I mean, they're doing what they have to do because they don't have a lot of choices, but they're literally being funneled by the Russians into losing propositions, and when you're trying to trundle your tanks forward to act as makeshift artillery pieces, I can't question the logic of doing it because you have to do it, but at the same time, it's...
As soon as your tank gets found by the opposition's intelligence, then their proper artillery is going to come screaming down upon you.
Yeah, and you know, they're literally in an ass-kicking competition with a hedgehog, and you're not going to win that. We will talk about the Ukraine conflict and get back to the artillery duels, but... tanks got to be doing something, so...
and if you've got the capability, you keep on rolling it out.
At least they're self-propelled, they can shoot and scoot, because being on the losing end of an artillery duel and being stationary is two terrible things to combine.
It's... I mean, both sides are probably working from very similar doctrine, so you know what the other team is actually trying to achieve and how they're going about it, because they come from a similar background of, okay, our divisional artillery is going to take on their battalion artillery, or our company artillery is going to take on their platoon-sized infantry or whatever else. So they know what's going on, so they know what they're probably facing. It's just a case of who can get find the target, call it into the appropriate level, and get the rounds going downrange faster. Yeah,
but when the sheer mathematics of you've got less tubes and you're running out of ammo, and they've got longer range tubes than you, that's not a good place to be. In an ideal world, you would leave that battle and go somewhere else, but when it's your country being invaded, you're out of options there.
Yeah. But you say they've got more tubes, but the thing is, those capabilities might be at a different bureaucratic level. And so you've got to get through a couple of different levels to say, I need X fire on this position, and that's got to go up 3 chains of command and down 3 chains of command until somebody actually pulls the trigger. And so that's one of your benefits of integrated fire support of, I've got a tank here, he's providing support to my infantry company that is 2Ks in front of him over that slight rise there. Bang. They're facing some sort of opposition. I'm getting him to fire rounds downrange now, but versus up the chain, down the chain, and because let's face it, the Russians haven't shown themselves, John, to have a very coordinated approach for a lot of this.
No, but they've just massed the artillery now, so
they are sort of turning it on.
Moving aside from the arcane world of artillery.
Yes. Which computers are based on. Just remember that, boys and girls. Computing first came about from...
What was the name they had for the people who did the math?
They did the math.
Those were the computers.
Yes. Yeah. They computed the artillery ranges and who was firing where. There you go. We're all basing it on our technology today. Yeah. So, John.
Yes.
What were you saying?
About what?
Tanks.
Yep.
And modern stuff.
Oh, you mean the most exciting news to ever happen?
This week?
Well, not ever, but probably the most exciting news since the Challenger 3 announcement.
Yes, actually, it's probably this time last year.
Yeah. The Panther is reborn.
KF-31?
51, I think.
51.
Anyway, it's just the Panther. Rheinmetall have said, stuff you people, we can make a whole vehicle, not just the gun. And announced that despite the fact that the French and German governments are working on their, the Mobile Ground Combat System?
Combined, no.
Yeah, it's MGCS, I think, Mobile Ground Combat System, which was to involve Rheinmetall's 130mm gun. Rheinmetall
and a French hull.
And a French hull, but no autoloader.
No.
Anyway, Rheinmetall has said, we are bringing the tank. We've got the whole tank, the whole vehicle. And it's going to be...
Built themselves a prototype.
Well, they built themselves a prototype and they've announced it, and I mean, it is beautiful. I don't think anyone who's ever looked at a tank could look at this and not say it's beautiful.
That belongs on a spaceship.
Yeah, it's
ready to go out and take on the alien hordes.
It's following on from the more recent versions of the Leopard 2, where the turret is almost the size of the hull, and sort of spins around on top of it.
It's beautifully flat and futuristic and everything else.
Well, with the weird little curves in funny places that somehow managed to traverse. It's very exciting design, and in their marketing material, and it's all just a marketing exercise right now, which I don't want to throw shade on Maximus. I quite like his YouTube videos, but he does tend to read the press releases uncritically.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, well, uncritically is my problem. Anyway, so 130mm gun, autoloader.
Getting the information out there for somebody else to provide the critique is not a bad option.
Sure. Anyway, so the Panther, which also ballsy call for a German company to bring back a World War II name. You're like, Leopard was a little bit of a throwback that they were willing to do, but they've just gone full on boom Panther.
Well, marketing and branding Panther's got a good brand.
There would have been a lot of meetings. There would have been so many meetings about this. But what I like, because just quite recently I was saying that in terms of the future of the tank, that taking the loader out, but not taking the crew member out and replacing that crew member with a electronic warfare.
Well, they mentioned in the press release that they haven't applied that yet, but there's
capability for
it. And I think I agree. You're right. That is a great idea of, because who's handling a bloody 130mm round, loading that by hand?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, they've released pictures of it. It is at least twice the size of the 125. The 120mm round.
So you're not doing that by hand, but you do need an extra capability in there, because nowadays it's all about the electronic warfare of who can do what and get inside each other's OODA loop. That's a good one for all you ex-military folks, is the OODA loop.
Yeah.
Can't actually remember what the acronym stands for.
Observe, orient, decide, act.
Quite possibly. I just know it's there.
And also John Boyd, one of the great fantasists of the 20th century. But yes, let's not get in a Boyd slaying match right now. So the thing with the Panther, though, is they have said there is capacity to have a mission specialist instead of a loader, which I think is something that tanks are crying out for, because there's so much work to do, and the commander shouldn't be doing things. The commander should be looking at things and telling people to do things.
And getting fed information from somebody else, rather than having to find all that information themselves.
Yeah, but there's certainly, in terms of the electromagnetic spectrum and how you're interacting with it, is really important.
Countermeasures. I mean, if you have some sort of countermeasures that need to be activated, when you turn them on, when you turn them off, your driver's not doing that, your gunner's not doing that, your commander's not doing that. You need somebody to be doing that sort of
fundamentally, all the things that happen on warships, and I've said before, warships tend to lead tanks by half a century with a lot of these things.
Land battleships.
Yeah, very much so, land battleships. But, someone to say, someone's turned on a fire control radar in our vicinity, and in fact, I know whose fire control radar this is, and they're not friendly. These are important things to know and respond to. Either you reverse quickly back over the hill, or you charge forward. But you need to know that the situation's changed based on what the other side's radars are doing. So that's good. And also, prominent in the marketing is protection from top attack.
Yes, because strangely enough, in the last 3 months, that's become a
something people think about.
Yeah, something people think about very much. Yeah, is being able to protect from those top-down attacks from anti-tank guided missiles that scream along at whatever speed, and then go boop, and then down, pop up, and then down again onto the top of the turret where the armor is thin.
Or in the case of the N-Law, it just screams over the top and shoots its shape charge straight down, which is I take my hat off to whoever thought of that. That's just genius.
There'd be a lot of Delta Vita, buddy, deal with that. I haven't really looked. I haven't looked at that sort of stuff, but
they can orient it correctly. But as you know, we keep saying the slow mo guys. video on shaped charges is well worth looking at, because one of the things they mention is that a shaped charge is at its strongest 6 times the diameter of the charge away from where it's fired. So if you've got a 10 centimeter wide shaped charge, then it's at its strongest 60 centimeters further down, which is gives you a bit of overflight.
There you go.
Yeah. Cool. Anyway, anything? I mean, it's fascinating that Rheinmetall have said stuff you to the
that is
the Franco-German project.
Yeah, saying we don't want to get involved in the bureaucracy, and realistically, it is the bureaucracy that is happening between France and Germany. They had tried doing this project previously, and
European cooperation projects fail all the time,
and both walked away from it and said no, we're just going to do our own things, and yet they were determined to try and provide one European response for a tank, for a future tank, and obviously that was still going through a lot of bureaucratic activities at the moment. They have
there was a prototype 4 years ago and nothing else to show for it since.
Whereas Rheinmetall is saying, we can be in production in the next 5 years or something.
And it should be noted, Rheinmetall already produced the Lynx, which is, by all accounts, a very fine infantry fighting vehicle. So it's not like they're just a cannon manufacturer. They have actually got completed full vehicles in production.
Including for Australia.
Yeah, well, it depends on which one we go with.
I thought we had them. No, we've got them. I can't remember. We'll look that up and tell you next time.
No, Tasman was correcting us. We mixed up our redbacks and our huntsmans last episode.
Yes, Australian spiders are some are deadly, some are cuddly, cute and cuddly.
By the way, Bjorn's just said he is wearing his t-shirt. So good work,
Thank
mate.
you, Bjorn.
The rest of you, we love you. We appreciate you. Get yourself a t-shirt.
Yeah. Make your choice.
Redbubble.com. Search for Totally Tanked. One word. Cool. Okay, I think we've covered most of what's in the Panther. Other than the politics are really interesting and how many actually get produced, we just don't know. But it's a huge investment on Rheinmetall's part to actually produce a prototype. With no one asking for it.
No, they've gone out on their own and done this, and obviously they said, well, there's an opportunity here, and we're going to jump in the market and see what happens. Because guess what, folks? There is a market for tanks at the moment. For some reason, there's...
The other thing I forgot was it has, in the prototype at least, make of that what you will, it has a pop-up module for missile launching and drone launching.
Yes, the separate one, not fired down the barrel, as John was saying before.
Yeah.
But yes, it's...
basically a bunch of extra barrels for firing other things.
Sounds like a mech to me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty exciting. They've combined...
Somebody's been watching some anime and said, look, why don't we just have a pop-up bloody...
missile launcher.
Missile launcher on the back of it that closes down inside a armoured part when it's not firing missiles.
And the thing is covered in sensors, which is basically... I'm not saying I'm any sort of genius, but everything I've always said was the future of the tank. They've brought into this package. Which... I don't know. I guess is good. It has lit an enormous fire under the GMCR team, and they need to extract their digits. And
they'll be scrambling this week to say, how do we get in front of this? Because otherwise, people will be making choices that. Why would I want to choose something that might be available in 20 years' time versus something that's going to be available in 5? And Australian submarine corporations might want to look at that. I did say. I bet the having changed governments since the last time. Well, I can't remember.
Yeah, I think we've changed governments in between. Yeah,
maybe. It was because it was before the election. So Australia has now changed governments. We now have a duly elected Prime Minister rather than a party selected.
Well, Morrison did win one election.
Oh, he did too, didn't he? Sorry. The miracle. The miracle.
The miracle. Yeah.
Anyway, so we're now hearing about how the previous government was planning to buy some Virginia class nuclear subs.
I'm sorry. Peter Dutton, who's now the leader of the opposition, is a delusional idiot.
I did say they were going to buy some Virginia-class subs.
On his best days. But the idea that we're just going to buy off the shelf a bunch of Virginia-class submarines from the 80s. US.
From the 80s. Somebody's been reading The Hunt for Red October or something.
No, but my bigger point is, like, literally... I've spoken before of a very aging Holden Astra, which is basically a General Motors hatchback from the 1990s. So we have actually ordered a new car to replace it, and it will be here in December. And that's buying a car from Toyota.
Yep.
Right?
It's a company that's really good at providing cars.
Yeah. I'm just saying there is no way on God's earth anyone is saying to the electric boat company... we'll have a couple of those and getting it anytime soon.
No.
Those production lines are full. They're very busy serving America's interests. What he may have been talking about, what may be happening, what we might see is an American sub with an American crew flying an Australian flag doing what America wants, but it is in no way an Australian capability.
No. But
we can pay for it.
No, that was the old plan. The new plan is, who knows what the new plan is going to be. I'm not going to speculate because that's a new plan. Mm-hmm. New government, John.
Yes.
New world.
Okay, I didn't even have this in my plan for us to talk about, but it's very exciting to talk about submarines.
I did send it to you the other day that I said that they were planning on buying a...
yes.
Somebody had been reading the Hunt for Red October and they were going to buy some Virginia classes.
Off-the-shelf nuclear submarines with... I mean, Nuclear Technician School... has an unbelievable suicide rate, and we have sent no one through it yet. No. And we're sure as hell not operating a nuclear submarine without a lot of these people. And somehow we can't even keep the diesel technicians to keep our current submarines at sea.
Heavy diesel engine is a heavy diesel engine, and it's highly employable.
Yeah, nukes? Anyway. Let's briefly turn to current events in the Ukraine. We've talked about the artillery duels. I have a feeling, in a sense, a big part of everything Ukraine was doing since 2014 and all of the NATO support they were getting was about stopping a Russian thunder run to just overwhelm the country.
Yes.
And that worked.
That did.
That did its thing. But now the Russians have given up on the thunder runs, having been, frankly, humiliatingly defeated.
Hugely.
And are doing a proper classical Russian offense in eastern Ukraine of just massing enormous amounts of artillery and smashing their way slowly forward.
They're encircling a strong point. What I've been watching is they've been encircling various strong points, coming around on three sides of it, isolating it and starving it of communications and support and logistics. And then once they've done that, then they're advancing through wherever they're going. And that is good tactics. And finally actually applying good military tactics to my mind. I mean, the Ukrainians are falling back as required. Unfortunately, being a large nation with a huge civilian population that's still stuck in a lot of these places, it is bad humanitarian situation of people are stuck in cities without ways to evacuate out of a war zone. So, but if the Ukrainians can keep basically holding out against the Russian advances until they get to natural obstacles like the Donbass River.
So the Dnieper.
No, it's Donbass, I thought.
Donbass is the region. Dnieper is the big river.
I thought it was... Anyway.
Excuse me.
Yep. That they can actually then hold them at those natural barriers and take advantage of that situation. But what that does mean is that if any discussions as to ceasefires or whatever happen in the future, the Russians will be in a much better position to say, well, this is ours and we're not giving it back.
Yeah, I do think that there's an issue that there's all of this NATO weaponry that's been flooding into Ukraine, and God knows how much of it's being sold to external parties. None of it, because the Western way of war is that if your enemy has massed artillery, you bring in air support to blow that stuff up. And no one's, the Ukrainians have asked, but no one is giving Ukraine the jets that they need. And then, for God's sake, the training. I mean, it's going to be years before you can actually pull this stuff together to drop bombs on Russian artillery. And then the problem the Ukrainians have is that the Western gear they're getting is all designed to be used with copious air support. And it's that's not going to end well for them. It's really problematic.
And the Russians just have the option of heading back over across the border and saying, "Well, you're not allowed to shoot us here, otherwise we're going to nuke you." So,
yeah, there's that, and then there's the problem the Ukrainians have got, that they're at this point utterly reliant on Western military aid. But that is coming on condition that they don't negotiate with the Russians, when the smartest thing they could do right now would be to negotiate with the Russians. But they would need to be very adroit in their footwork on doing that, or the Western arms dry up. And I really wish that, as a notionally Western person from Australia, that we weren't forcing the Ukrainians to fight to the last Ukrainian life.
No.
In what, frankly, they should be doing a settlement where they give up Crimea and the Donbass and Luhansk and set up some borders.
With the stipulation that that is it, and anything beyond that point in time is going to be hit by NATO forces.
There needs to be some security guarantees, but let's remember the Ukrainians gave up their nuclear weapons with security guarantees that were not honoured by the Western powers. So
the Western powers also gave security guarantees to Russia that they weren't going to expand
NATO to their borders. Yeah. So there's been we are not.
So history, we need to ignore history and actually deal with the situation that we have at the moment.
Yeah, but as everyone always says, at some point all wars end, and they end with some sort of negotiation.
Yes.
Even World War II ended with some sort of negotiation. Not a lot of negotiation, but a bit. And on that note, I'm getting shouted at by my better half.
Not shouted, just encouraged.
Yeah, well, interrupted in the middle of a recording to be told to go away. So we are going to finish now.
Thank you all very much for listening. I'm Rob, he's John, and we are...
Totally Tanked.
Totally Tanked. Thank you all.